Well, hello again. Time for my next video. And as you can see, I've got it running full screen. This is because this is an actual build of the game. Now, if you watched my last video, you'll know that I was struggling tremendously to actually get the project to build into a releasable format, and that is a problem I have subsequently solved. And yeah, so we've got the little start menu here, which is the same as what I showed in the previous video, but I've since changed a lot of stuff and redesigned a lot of things, so let's have a look. Okay, the first thing you will notice, if you give it a second, is the character now blinks. This is because I had this idea of having certain things happen while the character is blinking. Now, initially, when you start the game, the blink mechanic is set to essentially just choose a random number based on the actual interval between human blinks and then blink accordingly. But I've also got a key bound to close eyes. So if we do that, the character will actually close his eyes. And if you release the button, he'll open them again. I'll get into all of that in a bit. The other really cool thing is that I then figured if we're really going for this ultra first person thing where the character is blinking, we should have the character's eyes respond to light the same way that a normal human being's does, which means turning auto exposure on. Now, auto exposure is enabled by default in games like this, and normally I would turn it off and just set a standard exposure on the player camera. But I have now turned it back on, so you'll see if you look up at the sky and then look down at the ground, the character's eyes will respond. Now, this is important as well once we go inside, because setting things up like this means that indoor scenes will now be far more naturally lit than they would have otherwise, because the character's eyes are going to respond to darker interiors. The other thing that I've done before we go inside is I have streamlined the passing of time, which you may remember was done by completing chores, but I've now assigned a key press to it, because one of the things I wanted to test in this build was how the interior of the house looks at different times of the day. Now, my idea for the game is that day one is going to start late afternoon when your character arrives, but I've now got the time set to dawn, and I can pass time by pushing the T key, and you'll notice the sun moving smoothly in the sky. That was a whole nightmare to get set up, but I'll get into that in a bit. And now if we go inside, you'll see what happens is as we go inside, the character's eyes will respond and get used to the light. So we have a far more natural interior lighting design now, which is something I really like. Yeah, obviously not every room is going to look the same. It depends on how much light is coming in through the windows. This room looks particularly nice and natural, I think. And obviously, in all of the tests you would have seen in previous videos, the time was set to 3 in the afternoon, which means the sun would have been on this side of the house. But you can see that this side of the house is now largely in shadow. The drawback to this system is that light leaks that were more or less kind of okay are now looking pretty hideous. The worst one, and this is a problem I've yet to solve, is here. Now, if we go far away from the window on the other side, you'll see there's light leaking in. And if we go closer, you'll see it suddenly changes. This is a lot more visible if I advance the sun position so that the sun is overhead. We'll see. You can't really see now because we're inside, but yeah, there we go. You'll see we have that happening, and then when you get closer, it suddenly goes dark. Again, this is something I'm actively working on. now that I've got the interior lighting looking so nice, I don't want to go back to my old way of doing things. So it's now about patching up the problems. There's another problem here. You'll see when we get closer. This one is actually looking okay. Now it's worse when the sun... Okay, let me reset the sun back to dawn, and we'll just move it up a little bit so that you're getting the light in here. Yeah, this one is okay. I stuck a window here in the walk-in closet because that has been one of our solutions for this problem, is when there's areas where there's light leaks, just stick a window there, and then the light leak becomes less apparent, because when there is light on that side of the house and it's leaking in, the fact that there's a window there makes it less obvious. This is not the case here, and I think this has to do with the length of the corridor that I'm in, and it's got something to do with light draw distance. And yeah, the documentation on this is almost non-existent, because Lumen, which is this real-time lighting technology, is brand new in Unreal Engine 5, and they're literally still writing the manuals. So, but as you can see, it looks pretty good. In spite of that, if we advance time, I'm going to just keep hitting the T key until the sun actually comes in through this window over here. There we go. You'll see now on this side of the house we have this beautiful warm buttery afternoon light coming in. If we head upstairs, you'll see the same thing here. Very, very happy with the way these rooms are looking. There's a room in here. This looks better in the morning light, and but even so, you've got residual light coming through the windows that aren't getting any direct sunlight, and you can still see, which is nice. Some parts of the house deal better with this lighting solution than others, and again, this is a work in progress. I've probably spent a week on this already, trying to balance things out, and I'm now at the point where I've decided I need to move on to other things, including populating the rooms that are still empty with furniture, etc, etc, etc. I've spent enough time on systems. Here you can see again we've got some nasty leakage in a corner here, and we've got similar leakage on this side, I think. Yes. Again, problems that I'll get into when I'm going to open the editor up in a minute and show you one of the things I've done that has helped. The other problem here is that these garage doors do not block light effectively, because instead of being static meshes, they're skeletal meshes, because they're animatable and the pieces move. As you can see, when the garage door opens, the pieces split up. So you can't trust them to block light effectively. So you end up with this weird lighting in here, which again, I've placed windows to try and mitigate this. And then the last thing to do with the lighting is, if we just advance time until sunset, you'll see we get a nice smooth transition into night, and the sound effects change and everything else is as it was. Okay, let's see. Oh yes, now that it's night time, I've also redone every single light inside the house, which I'm much happier with. I was using point lights, which radiate light in a 360 degree circle around the light source, which meant they were casting light onto the ceiling above them, which in some cases, would be nice, but in this case I felt was looking kind of shoddy. So instead I'm using lights that only radiate light downward, and for the actual light itself, let me switch the light off and switch my flashlight on. For the actual light itself, I've got this static mesh. You can see what it is there. It's like a little LED thing that has a property which you can use to make the glass front of the light emissive, so that it creates its own light. So in addition to having the light that shines downward as a component of the light itself, the static mesh becomes emissive, which gives it that glow. So, and yeah, all of the lights do that now, except for one or two. The porch light up at the top, where was it? This porch light are stuck with a 360-degree point light, just because I liked the way that it kind of lit up the wall behind it. I felt this looks quite natural, so that one stayed the same. And the garage lights have always used the same technology as the other lights, but I've got models of fluorescent tubes in there, so they look slightly different. And yeah, that is all I wanted to talk about there. So let's get back into the editor so I can show you the code. 1 second, please. Okay, welcome back to the project file. First, let me just very briefly talk about how I managed to get the game to actually bold. I do believe that I mentioned this in my previous video and said I was going to test it that evening. Well, it worked. So very briefly again, all you do is you create a blank project and then export the maps folder from your working project. And the game will then generate a list of all of the assets and all of the blueprints and everything referenced in these map files, and import all of that stuff across automatically. And then you end up with a nice clean new project file with only the assets you're using. And from there you do a build. Let's talk about the blink mechanic. I essentially went and made these two files that look like this. The one looks like this. This is an upper eyelid. The curve is not amazing, but you know, it's okay considering how fast the blink is. And the bottom eyelid is similar, like this. And then I just animated it. And the player blueprint, we will have a look for, here we go, eye control, blink mechanic, there we go. We're essentially running it on an event begin play, which then gets a random number between 3 and 10 and delays for that number of seconds. We then check this variable, blinking enable, to see whether it's true or false. And if it's true, we cast to player controller and access this blinking widget here and play the blink animation. And if it's false, we essentially we return in a loop to this event over here. And the reason we're checking to see if blinking is enabled is because I have this eye control thing here, which allows me to manually close the character's eyes. And while the character's eyes are closed, we don't want the character trying to blink. So, and that's pretty much the same thing as above. And the reason for all of this stuff is I very much like the idea of having your character close their eyes when they're scared or when they're tripping balls, for instance. I've done some work on that as well, which I'll show off in a future video. It's looking very, very trippy indeed. Yeah, and that is how the blink mechanic works. The new lighting system we've spoken about. I'll just show you what the code looks like now. In addition to when the light switches on, in addition to playing the sound and then setting the visibility of the light, we also need to change the material instance of the light so that the emissive strength of the material is higher, which is how I get that kind of glow around the light bulb when it switches on. So I had to add that into, I think there's 28 lighting blueprints. I had to add that in individually for each light in a lighting blueprint, and then also here to the power failure mechanic, which I've shown off in a previous video. So that was a good couple of hours of work. The chore counter, I wanted to very quickly have a look at that as well, because that has gotten a lot cleaner. You may remember I was using this system which I was quite pleased with at the time, comparing the chore counter, which advances by 1 every time the character does a chore, like watering a plant or whatever, against this variable here, chore counter check. And when they're not the same, we make them the same and then do the rest of the code, which in this case is advancing the sun in the sky. The problem with this is it was running off event tick, which means it was running every single frame. What I found essentially to be a lot easier was to go to game mode. Instead of relying on that chore counter check variable to advance time, I made an event dispatcher. So now every time the chore counter goes up by 1, it just calls the event dispatcher. Which means it's not checking something every frame, it's waiting for the event dispatcher to be called and then doing the code that's attached to it, which is a far more elegant and less wasteful way of doing things. And yeah, the moving the sun in the sky was a nightmare. The whole idea behind dealing with these rotational values is, God, I mean, I don't even want to get into it. That's how frustrating it was. Suffice it to say, I had to go down a rabbit hole learning about something called gimbal lock, which is a real engineering and physics problem, and is a tremendous problem in computer animation. If you want to know what gimbal lock is, Google it. It's really hard to explain. And I had to compensate for that in ways that I don't even want to get into. The other thing was, as I was rotating the sun, it was moving far faster and further than it should have, which I eventually realized was because I'm using a linear interpolate to move it. And as the linear interpolate is interpolating between two values, value A is changing because the linear interpolate is running, which means as value changes, the interpolation changes. And therefore, there was this acceleration effect, which, again, I'm not going to even try and get into explaining it because this video is going to end up way too long. But it's one of those unique programming problems which, once you understand it, makes complete sense. And you're like, how could I not see that? But at the point where you're trying to troubleshoot it, you feel like you're losing your mind. It doesn't make any sense at all. Anyway, the one of the problems is when rotating the sun, we have to change a rotator into a floating point number. And the way that the software deals with the sun position is noon is negative 90, but 5 degrees below noon would be, let's say, negative 80. But 5 degrees past noon is also negative 80. That doesn't make sense. The sun, when the sun direction changes, we essentially need to flip the sun movement from a positive to a negative. Otherwise, the sun will reach noon and then just go back in the opposite direction instead of continuing. And the code to work out how to do that involved me using these rotators with error tolerance. So the sun is moving by 10 degrees and there's 9.9999 degrees of error tolerance. So that if it's anywhere near the meridian, it will consider that to be absolute and then continue. I can actually show you that. And this is partially because of that problem and partially because of gimbal lock again. I thought, oh God, I said I wasn't going to get into this. If we advance the sun, you will notice it'll take a few clicks to get there. Now watch what happens. I'm going to keep pushing T to advance time, and at a certain point it's not going to advance. There. Now when I push T again, there's a little skip and it advances. That is that little bit of code that I just showed you happening. That's it reaching, it's getting close to a value of negative 90, realizing that, and then changing direction and flipping around. And this was days and days and days of fine-tuning and tweaking the numbers, trying to get it to work. If by any chance sometime in the future someone's watching this video who knows of a better way of doing this, please leave a comment and tell me, because I was pulling my hair out regarding this matter for days, and I still think it seems like an incredibly stupid way of doing things, but it works at least. And not only does it work, I can change this value, the sun movement, it's either 10 or -10 at this point, but it could just as easily be 5 or -5, as long as I set this, if the value is 5, to 4.9999 instead of 9.9999, then the whole system still works. And I haven't tried scaling it further than that, but I'm hoping that that will be the case no matter what those values are set to. Yes, there is one more thing. This is what I resorted to doing to solve the light leaks. There's this new folder here called light blocking planes, and you can see there's a bunch of objects in here. If I go and switch off the first floor and the second floor and let's say the roof, why did it not switch off the second floor? There we go. You'll see that there's this plane over here, and if we go down, you'll see there's another one here. They're only visible from one side, but they do block light. Ignore this glitching problem here, it's not an issue. And if we look from the inside here, you'll see there's these light blocking planes everywhere around here. And this is to compensate for something to do with the way that Lumen works. Now, I was having all kinds of problems with this. It has to do with something called mesh distance fields. If I set it up to show mesh distance fields and I turn first and second floor on again, you'll see you can actually see the walls. Now, for some reason this was not working. I have no idea why, but whole pieces of my first floor and some of my second floor were not showing up as meshes in this view, which means light was getting straight through. Now, after fiddling with it and changing the values and then changing them back, by the way, to the default, suddenly these meshes were no longer transparent in this mode. But in the meantime, I had designed this entire system where each floor has this inside out cutout on the inside of it. If I switch off all of the floors, you'll see if I switch off first floor, second floor, and ground floor, and go inside, I can actually switch this mode off. Yeah, there, you can see it. I had to basically make these cutouts for everything, just to stop light from getting in. Don't worry about the fact that light is getting in here now. It's because obviously there's gaps here because that's where the other mesh is, or the floor in some cases. And this solved light leaks in some places and did nothing in other places, and as far as I could tell, it was pretty much random whether it helped or not. Something I did discover while I was trying to research and figure out the light leakage problem is that in the documentation, which, as I said earlier, is only now being written for Lumen, in one of the Lumen spec sheet kind of documents, they say Lumen is not designed to work with large meshes, so walls, floors, and ceilings should all be kept separate, which I didn't do. I didn't do in this project because I figured if light is getting in where meshes intersect with each other, why didn't I just join them up and solve the problem? So in one particularly nasty fever dream of a day, I decided I was going to scrap everything that I had. Obviously not the inside of the building, but all of the walls, and start building the walls again from scratch and then keep them as individual pieces. And about halfway through the exterior walls of the ground floor, realized how much work it was and thought to myself, this is actually insanity what you're doing right now. Luckily, I had a backup to fall back on, and then because things had gotten so intense, I actually went and downloaded my off-site backup from the night before and just left it on the hard drive in case the shit really hit the fan. And yeah, like I said, I've now got things a little bit more balanced and it's looking okay. If I just switch everything off and on again so we can get back to the default view. Yeah, it's looking okay. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.